In this video, we're going to go over the steps you need to take in order to solve for an unknown side on a triangle using a given angle or a selected angle. One of the ways to solve this using the angle information is to use trig identities. And one acronym we use to try to remember what these identities are is called SOHCAHTOA. I'm going to go ahead and write that out in a very specific way. SOHCAHTOA. What this acronym is telling us is that the sine, that's what this S represents, of an angle is equal to the length of the opposite side divided by the length of the hypotenuse. Cosine of an angle is equal to the length of the adjacent side divided by the length of the hypotenuse. And tangent of an angle is equal to the length of the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. If we want to solve for a particular angle, say, for example, for a particular side, say for a particular side x in this example, we need to go through a series of steps to set up a trig formula that will allow us to solve for x. The first step is you want to pick two key sides on this triangle that you're going to use because you're going to write them as a ratio and relate the angle, this angle 20, to those two sides. So the sides that you are going to pick when setting up a trig function will be, so you're going to pick the side with the variable you're trying to solve for. So the variable you are solving for. You will also pick the side that has a number. So with a number. The third thing you want to do is you want to label what those two sides are. The two selected sides. Okay, so let's go over here. If we're trying to solve for x, like we are in the first problem, we're supposed to select the side that has x on it. So we're going to select this side, basically right here. And the other side we're going to pick from step 2 is the side with the number on it. Well, that would be this side up here. So we've selected the two sides we need to set up the trig relationship. Now we need to label them. We need to figure out what they actually are. And the rule is if you put your finger on the angle you're going to use, in this case we're going to use 20 degrees, the side you are not touching is the opposite side. So in this case, the opposite side of angle 20 is angle x, side x. The side that's the hypotenuse is always across from the 90 degrees. So in this case, the 7 is our hypotenuse. Now using this information, we can pick which trig function to use because we need to use the x and the 7. Well, that's the opposite and the hypotenuse sides. And if I go over to SOHCAHTOA over here, the trig function that uses opposite and hypotenuse is sine. So I'm going to write the sine of 20 degrees equals the opposite side, that's the O up here, divided by the length of the hypotenuse. So the opposite side was x, so I'll put x, divided by the hypotenuse, which was 7. Now this formula is set up and ready to be solved. Since it's a proportion, I can write this sine of 20 degrees over 1. Since it's a proportion, we can use cross multiplication to solve this. So in this case, I'm just going to show what's going to be multiplied by what. So I'm going to take 7 times the sine of 20 degrees. Now remember, the sine of 20 degrees, this is all just one number. So I'm going to write it as 7 times the sine of 20 degrees is equal to 1 times x. Okay. Now, I can actually figure out what sine of 20 degrees is by punching that into my calculator. So I'll hit the sine button, then I'll type in 20, and then I'll hit enter. That number is approximately 0.342. So I'm going to replace that with 0.342 times 7 equals x. Then if I take 0.342 times 7, that'll give me x. So my final answer is about 2.39 approximately. So x is 2.39. Okay, well now let's use these rules to solve for y. If I'm going to solve for y, I'm supposed to use, if I go back up to my steps, I have to pick the side with the variable on it. Well, that means I'm now picking side y. That would be right here. So I need to use this side. And then I also need to pick a side with a number. That's going to be the hypotenuse again. So I'm going to use the side with y and the hypotenuse side. Step 3 says label the two I selected. Well, the hypotenuse is already labeled, and the y side is going to be the adjacent side. The adjacent side is always next to the angle we're talking about, which in this case is 20 degrees, and it's not the hypotenuse, essentially. So if I'm going to use the adjacent side and the hypotenuse side, I have to think to myself, which trig function do I use for that? And the answer is the one that uses adjacent and hypotenuse. That would be cosine. So I'm going to write the cosine of 20 degrees equals the ratio of adjacent over the hypotenuse. So the adjacent side was y, and the hypotenuse was 7. Just like before, I can solve this using cross multiplication because it is a proportion. So when I set this up, I'm going to have 7 times the cosine of 20 degrees equals y times 1. I can type in cosine in my calculator, 20, and hit enter, and that's going to tell me what the cosine of 20 degrees is, and it is approximately 0.94. So that's still times 7, and that equals y. If I take 7 times 0.94, it's going to be approximately 0.658. And I'll go ahead and write that answer below. Now, one way I can check for reasonableness on this is side y is the adjacent side. So if I write in 6.58 over here, it seems like it's pretty plausible it could be 6.58. Now, if I'd solved this and gotten 20, that'd be a problem, because that would make this side longer than 7, and that doesn't make sense. The hypotenuse is always the longest side.